Hello, and welcome to Field Lab Earth, the podcast that's all about past and present advances in the fields of agronomic, crop, soil, and environmental sciences. Today, we'll be talking to Dr. Peter Thorne about adapting weed management practices in smallholder farms. Researchers work hard to develop best practices and recommendations for farmers. However, cultural practices may affect how farmers do or are able to implement these recommendations on their farms. This episode, Peter discusses his work bridging the gap between researcher recommendations and farmer needs in smallholder Ethiopian farms. Make sure to listen to the end for our new Student Spotlight section too. We'll talk more about all that in a minute, but before we dive in, we wanted to thank our sponsors, starting with Meter Group. Meter specializes in robust soil moisture sensing, innovative weather monitoring, cloud data logging, advanced data visualization software, and more. Their well-published scientific instrumentation is used worldwide in universities, research and testing labs, government agencies, agriculture, and industrial applications. Listen to their new podcast, We Measure the World, to hear how innovative researchers leverage environmental data to make our world a better and more sustainable place at metergroup.com/fieldlabearth. Our second sponsor is Gazmet Technologies, the maker of the GT5000 Terra, the smallest portable FTIR multi-gas analyzer for greenhouse gas and environmental research. Measure carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, ammonia, and water vapor in real time simultaneously from static or automated chambers and ruminant emissions. Visit www.gazmet.com, that's Gazmet spelled Gasmet, or email sales@gazmet.com for more information. I'm your host, Abby Morrison. Let's talk about science. Hi everyone, welcome to the show. Today we have Peter Thorne with us. Peter was born in Bristol in the UK. After his school studies, he went as an undergraduate to Oxford University in the UK. On completion, he moved to the University of Nottingham, where he completed his PhD research in animal nutrition in 1986, with part of the research studies carried out at the University of the Philippines in Los Banos. His career has encompassed both the public and private sectors, focused mostly on the evolution of mixed farming systems from the perspective of their livestock components in Africa and Asia. Before joining the International Livestock Research Institute to manage Africa Rising, he spent 12 years as an independent consultant working on both research and development projects. He started his career post-qualification in the Pacific Islands, working for what was then the UK government's Natural Resources Institute, and still enjoys swimming in warm oceans. Welcome to the show, Peter. How are you doing today?
I'm very good, thanks, Abby.
Wonderful. It is such a pleasure to have you today. So today we are talking about smallholder farms in Ethiopia and specifically Faba Bean growth and harvest in that area. So to get us started, can you just talk about Ethiopian farming at large in these systems, typically how that works, what it looks like? Start us off there.
Sure. I think Ethiopian farming system is probably very different from what many of your listeners would be used to. First of all, people have a kind of preconception of Ethiopia as a country that's experienced its fair share of problems related to food production and food availability. And they'd be very surprised to see some of the systems in the highlands of the country which are extremely productive, both in terms of crops and livestock. One of the key features of the system is this integration of crops and livestock on the same farms, often very small farms, maybe even less than a hectare, but providing a whole range of crop and livestock products for the farm household to consume themselves and for sale at local markets.
Wonderful. And I mentioned in your bio you work with Africa Rising. So can you tell me a little bit about that project and what some of your goals are?
Sure. Africa Rising is a project that's been funded over the last 11 years now in the Ethiopian highlands by the US Agency for International Development. And it's really a project that aims to identify appropriate strategies for what we call sustainable intensification of mixed farming systems in the highlands. I think sustainable intensification is quite a widely applied paradigm now, and many more industrialized systems have tried to find ways of producing food more sustainably while maintaining or increasing the kind of productivity and the efficiency of the production practices that they employ. So we've been kind of applying very much the same ideas or the same paradigm to these smallholder farming systems that I've just described. So it's really looking at how to intensify crop production, but also, as I said, that the crops are very integrated with livestock. They're important natural resource management considerations at landscape scale. So our hypothesis really was that if we're going to intensify those systems sustainably, it has to be done across the whole system, taking into account objectives that relate to crop production, livestock production, and NRM.
Okay, great. And then finally, can you talk a little bit about Faba Bean in general, how that crop functions in these systems, and how that kind of relates to the initial research that this specific project we're going to be talking about today, kind of how those interface?
Sure. So one of the crops that we've been working with quite intensively over the last 11 years is Faba Bean, which forms part of the system in many of the sites that we've been working at. Faba Bean, as people should know, is a legume which produces a bean that's important for human consumption. But it also produces quite a lot of crop residue, which is important for the livestock component. So it's one of those kind of crops that in these smallholder farming systems in the Ethiopian highlands has very much a dual role. Our initial objective, I guess, was to look at the intensification of the bean production side, but the research that we're going to talk about today really kind of highlighted some of the complexities of doing that in a way that's acceptable to farmers, because, as I've said, the mixed nature of the system means that we can't always focus on one key objective. We have to take account of other factors if the technologies that we try to promote are going to be acceptable to farmers.
Sure. So can you talk about kind of that dynamic between balancing these new recommendations to improve, yield or intensification or what have you, and how that relates to kind of the traditional cultural practices, specifically for this crop, in terms of both the livestock part of things and the crop growth?
Yeah. So, as many people would be aware, the kind of traditional agronomic approach to intensifying a crop like fava bean, it would apply to wheat and barley and maize as well, probably, is to think, right, we need a better variety, a more high-yielding variety. We need to improve our agronomic practices to make sure that yield potential is realised. And Bob's your uncle. There we are. We have a solution. We've doubled bean production. What we've found in a lot of mixed farming systems, and the research I'm describing today is a very neat example of this, is that that doesn't always work. So clearly farmers are interested in increasing the productivity of their beans, of getting a higher yield from that bean crop, but to them it's not just a bean crop. The plot of land on which those beans are planted can provide a lot of other benefits. I already talked about the haulms, the residues that are important for livestock feeding. But another thing that it would be very easy to miss without an understanding of farmers' objective is that farmers have a kind of relatively unusual weeding practice. They tend to leave weeds in these crops for quite a long time, probably up to 6 to 8 weeks. And they're looking for biomass production from weeds. And the reason they do that is that they want to remove those weeds and use it to feed their livestock. So if you go in with your improved variety, with early weeding, multiple weedings, you've taken out part of the productive output of the plot of land. And we wanted to we wanted to quantify those the benefits that were being left if you went down that traditional crop improvement route. And we wanted to look at alternative ways of intensifying the plot so we could get more grain yield, but also we would support the other objectives that the farm has in managing that plot, namely to feed their livestock so they don't die.
Sure. So then you had two experiments. One kind of led into the other as you were exploring these ideas and objectives. So can you tell me about those two experiments and kind of how you went about testing these various facets of this problem?
Sure. So the first experiment was really an exploratory experiment. We just wanted to look at the consequences of often when I say improved here, I'm using inverted commas. So the improved management of fava beans in association with an improved variety versus the traditional crop and management practices. So as I've already implied, the implications of that were that if we took into account all of those uses of the crop, we found broadly that there was actually no benefit in intensifying simply with an improved variety and supposedly better management, although when aligned to farmers' objectives, it turns out that it wasn't actually better management. So we did some economic analyses based on the data that we the biophysical data that we collected, and we found that actually there's no improvement in the value to cost ratio of improving bean production in that way. And we concluded that that would be a reasonable explanation for why farmers tend not to adopt intensive management of improved varieties of beans. So that was the first experiment, which was really just to set the scene.
Okay, so it's kind of like you may get more money from the crop from a higher yield, but you're losing money and having to then either buy livestock or, the consequences of, poor nutrition for the livestock. Is that kind of the trade-off that you're looking at there?
Yes, essentially. I mean, you can look at the kind of the value to livestock as a kind of opportunity cost linked to intensification. So if you don't have an alternative way of meeting that need, which will have a cost associated with it as well, then you're unlikely to see any widespread adoption. And often it goes beyond simple economics. I think, as I've said, these are mixed farming systems, and the crops and livestock work off each other, and it can often be the case that there simply isn't an alternative for feeding livestock. So if you don't cater for them by using every resource that they have, including so-called weeds in these crops, in these crop plots, your livestock you can't keep your livestock. You either have to get rid of them or they die, and that's not an option for most farmers. We did do some peripheral analyses around the species composition of the weeds that were being removed for feeding. Although they might have been viewed as weeds, they're actually, some of them are quite valuable in terms of crude protein content and the energy that they can supply to livestock. And our estimates were that they could be supporting the associated livestock for maybe up to 3 months or so of the year. It's not just a little bit of feed for a couple of weeks. It's potentially for a dairy cow, you could keep a dairy cow going for 3 months on the removed biomass.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to ask a clarifying question about Ethiopian climate. From what I understand from your paper, they have a dry season and a rainy season, so there isn't, as far as like being able to provide other like food sources, you said that's not really available. Is the land such that you don't really have like a field to graze them in because it's too dry? Like, what is the climate's weather situation, and how does that compound or influence any of these?
So it depends a little where you are in the country, but it's crudely it's a bimodal rainfall pattern, which may shift a bit in terms of when it happens during the year, depending on whether you're in the north or the south of the country, whether at high altitude or low altitude. The main rainy season would be between June and September, say, and there's often a not entirely reliable but sometimes significant rainy season between, say, February and April. The dry season then is quite extended, and some of your listeners will be well aware that keeping animals alive during a dry season is a challenge for, in all sorts of systems, even in parts of the US, I imagine. So the main source of food during the dry seasons would be crop residues, including bean haulms, but the residues of the staple cereals, people may not have heard of teff, but it's a cereal crop that's grown widely in Ethiopia. It's by far the main staple cereal. So there would be teff straw, there might be wheat straw, there might be maize straw, depending on where you are. Grazing is tricky. There is often access to some grazing at some times of the year, but the livestock population is large per capita, per unit area, so the pressure on grazing is very high, doesn't last very long. There are significant concerns about environmental degradation as a result of overgrazing. Again, not uncommon, but it is quite an acute problem in many parts of Ethiopia. So there is always this tension about maintaining livestock year round, which is why something like these weeds are so valuable, because, as I say, they're not just a short-term feed resource. They can make a significant portion of the ration for some animals on a year-round basis, and filling those gaps that would otherwise occur.
Okay, I think that helps provide some extra context for me. So then you had a secondary experiment after this kind of first analysis one. Can you tell me a little bit about that experiment and what your goals were with that one?
Yes, of course. We kind of thought it was a little bit defeatist to sort of say, well, you can't intensify bean production by providing new varieties and changing the agronomics sort of practices around that. It seemed to be a bit sort of, we're not just saying, oh, you have to feed your livestock. We appreciate the value that increased productivity of grain legumes can, the opportunities that offers to farmers. So we were thinking, well, could we kind of be a bit more strategic about this? And we came up with an alternative intensification pathway, which is really to look at a more formal intercropping system. So intercropping faba beans with some sort of specialist forage crop. So the idea being that a properly managed intercrop ought to be more productive for the grain crop, and well, as I said, the quality of the weeds is actually quite good, but farmers have reported that over a period of years, the weed seed bank depletes, and the quality of the weeds that they're getting also declines as a result. So a kind of planned forage crop intercropped with the beans ought to give us a more sustainable, repeatable kind of result. And that was the second experiment that we did, which was looking at again, we used the kind of traditional practice and the so-called improved practice as both as kind of controls. But then we looked at an intercrop with oats, forage oats, over a period of 3 years. So we had 3 years data for, to try and assess how robust the system might be, because, as everyone knows, the impacts of climate change are probably increasing year-on-year variability in the productivity of these kind of systems.
Okay, so you were working with forage oats. So can you talk to me a little bit about, obviously you're trying to put something in to replace these weeds, and whether that's to be kind of more sustainable than the weeds in the long run, or of better nutritive value to the animals, or maybe provide other, ecosystem services or value to the farmer. So can you talk to me about why you went with this specific kind of plant? Why were there other plants that you worked with or toyed with? Like, what decisions are impacting that specific choice in this project?
Sure, that's a good question. We went with oats because, as I said in the introduction, Africa Rising is a project that looked at many different aspects of intensification across different components of the farming system, and we already had a kind of portfolio of potential forage crops that we tested on their own in terms of the extent to which farmers were able to manage and produce a reasonable crop, and the extent to which they were acceptable to the livestock that they were managing, and provided a good result when fed to those animals. So oats was one of those crops that we'd had good results with. They did well in the agroecologies that we were working in. They produced an amount of forage that would cover a significant period of the year, of that dry season that I was explaining the complexities of before. Farmers liked them. Farmers were able to grow them. So that's why oats were chosen, because we knew that they would meet the criteria that farmers applied to evaluating foragers. And agronomically, we thought they'd probably do quite well intercrop with beans.
Okay, and then forgive my ignorance if this is a foolish question. So, from my understanding, forage is mostly designed for animal consumption and animal use. But is there opportunity for, also harvesting the oats for other things and then just using, the stems and leaves? I don't know anatomy of plants very well, so maybe that's, a foolish question. But is there opportunity to, replace these with another crop that also gives that forage? Is that something you were looking at, or is the oats valuable, for the nutrition of the livestock to the point that that's not worth it?
It's certainly not a stupid question at all. I mean, I think we have looked at what we call dual-purpose crops in many contexts, and they do have potential in these kind of systems. If you were going to do what you suggest, you would be looking at different varieties of oats, because the oats that we've been using are forage oats. They've been bred for maximum productivity of green forage from the system. But you could certainly grow oats for the grain, and then you would have the residues to use as farmers use the bean haulms. The only thing possibly in Ethiopia is that oats is, I'm not saying nobody consumes it, but it's not a main staple food crop, so the demand for it is likely to be somewhat less. Sure. We would perhaps look at other cereals if we were looking for kind of a dual purpose function in this system.
Everyone, I hope you're enjoying the show. Interested in learning more? Peter's paper, Redesigning Traditional Weed Management Practices in Faba Bean Production to Optimize Food Feed Production in the Smallholder System, published in Agronomy Journal, is always freely available. If you are a certified crop advisor or certified professional soil scientist, you can take a quiz for continuing education units for this episode, which can be found in our show notes or on certifiedcropadvisor.org. Thanks again also to our sponsors, Gasmet Technologies and Meter Group. For Gasmet Technologies, the GT5000 Terra is a robust and portable multi-gas analyzer for field work, weighing 20.7 pounds. The GT5000 Terra is splash-proof IP54 rated, with an internal pump and battery and instantaneous readings of up to 50 gases at sub-ppm concentrations. Check out the quick setup guide and learn more about Gasmet Technologies at www.gasmet.com and the links in the show notes. Meter specializes in robust soil moisture sensing, innovative weather monitoring, cloud data logging, advanced data visualization software, and more. Their well-published scientific instrumentation is used worldwide in universities, research and testing labs, government agencies, agriculture, and industrial applications. Listen to their new podcast, We Measure the World, to hear how innovative researchers leverage environmental data to make our world a better and more sustainable place at metergroup.com/fieldlabearth. Thank you for being our sponsor. Let's get back to the show. You already mentioned that the first experiment kind of proved to you that it's not really helpful to get that improved yield or intensification if you have to lose the livestock in order to get that. But what did you find in your second experiment about maybe swapping those weeds out for these oats? What did that lead to?
Well, I think it's one experiment. I think we did it in 60 farms. So it's indicative rather than prescriptive, I think, the results, but they were quite encouraging. I think we found that, our hypothesis that a planned system would actually be beneficial to the farmer in terms of income were borne out. We had about a 20% increase in income compared to the traditional system and the, shall we call it, the conventional improved system, following the kind of traditional route to improvement. So certainly that intercropping system did play out quite well in terms of maintaining some element of the yield gain for the beans, but giving a significant amount of associated livestock feed. So I think we found that very helpful. Another aspect that we looked at was really, obviously, a variety that you're going to grow, a bean variety that you're going to grow monocrop is not necessarily best suited to growing as an intercrop. So we did do a little bit. We tested 6 different bean varieties in association with alone and in association with the oats in the intercrop, and we certainly found that some varieties, there's around a 30% difference in yield under intercropping conditions. So the whole landscape changes in terms of varietal selection, in terms of management practice, and very important to get the two in balance and get them right. A principle that any agronomist will know.
Sure. Yeah. Makes sense to me. Well, I mean, that seems very promising. So that's very exciting. I'm very happy for you and your team to be making some good headway there. So we kind of have touched on this throughout a little bit, but it seems like there's still a lot of good research that can be done on this topic and these relationships. But what else are the next steps for this? What other questions are you hoping to explore as you move forward and explore these various relationships? Where are we going with this?
Well, as I said, we've had 11 years of funding from the US government, and the project will be ending towards the end of this year. We do have new initiatives coming together that we hope will be able to take up some of the research that was conducted under Africa Rising. I'm quite optimistic about that. We're just at the planning phase for those at the moment. Whether we're able to fund continuation of this work, well, that's funding's always the the fly in the ointment. Having said that, I think, well, as I say, this is a kind of indicative study, and we need to kind of look at it in terms of more options. I think you mentioned the possibility of using other fodder crops in a similar sort of system, really kind of looking for the most appropriate varieties for these improved dual purpose systems rather than for sole production of for grain legume. I think we need to look a little more widely at some of the systems contexts of this work, how it fits into the system, whether there are other alternatives, what are the benefits for long-term soil fertility, for example. There's a lot of open-ended questions about these kind of systems, and we need to look at the most appropriate ways for scaling these kind of technologies, because obviously they're a little different from what farmers are used to, so that brings in all the questions about the capacity support that's need to get them more widely used. The perennial problem in many of these systems is seed supply. Can we get these varieties embedded in the seed systems? Are people going to be able to get bean seeds and oat seeds at the same time? These are the kind of logistical questions that can often put pay to many promising technologies that have worked under these were all on-farm experiments, but obviously they're managed on-farm experiments, managed in conjunction with the farmers, but we're able to make sure of the supply of resources that are needed to run the experiments. We can't do that for 3 million households. So, these technology. Another question about these technologies is their adoptability. To what extent is it feasible to farmers to adopt them at a wider scale?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of why we were drawn to your paper as a podcast topic, is just there are so many factors to consider, whether it's, needing to feed the livestock or, cultural practices, availability of resources, all of these factors that affect farmers everywhere. It's not just in this area, it's all around the world as we seek to improve these systems. There's always factors that aren't necessarily obvious on the surface. So it's always fun to be able to dig in and see how all of these systems and relationships connect across this massive agronomic web that we live in our planet.
Absolutely.
Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on today. It's been so fun to dig into this project. I have 3 questions left for you. The first one is, if people want to learn more about any of the topics that we've talked about today, or Africa Rising, or what's next, what can they do to find that information?
Well, Africa Rising has its own website. I think we can post the link below on the podcast site, africarising.net, and that describes that would describe this particular piece of work. But there's much more going on. I mean, Africa Rising in Ethiopia has sister projects in West Africa and in East and Southern Africa, and they've done a whole load of work on all sorts of aspects of sustainable intensification. Our funding, of course, came through your wonderful Feed the Future initiative, USAID's wonderful Feed the Future initiative, which I think I would recommend anybody to go and look at the fantastic work that initiative program, whatever they call it, I don't know, but I mean that's made huge inroads into poverty alleviation, equity, and other problems faced in developing countries.
Those are some great resources to look into and great places to learn more information. The next question I have for you is, if people want to take that next step and maybe get involved in this kind of research, what can they do to start taking those first steps?
We would encourage anybody who has an interest in this area to get in touch with us. We have many collaborators in US universities and universities all over the world, and they can be very constructive collaborations. The universities can filter in students who can support the work, and the nature of our research is very applied. It's very near market. As I said, we did these experiments on farms in farmers' fields, but sometimes there's a need to collaborate with universities and research institutes that can do supporting experimentation under more controlled conditions. So we do have a number of those collaborations, but we're always interested to hear more. We don't know everybody who's involved in these kind of fields across the whole world. So I'd encourage anyone to contact us who had a concrete interest, concrete idea. If you have funding, even better. But we do many funding applications jointly with US and other universities.
Sure, of course, yeah. Team effort, for sure. Final question for you here is, what is one fun fact that listeners would not know about you if all they had was your research?
Well, I do like to ride motorbikes, but I don't have a Harley Davidson, so that's one of my hobbies. I also make my own beer, but not at the same time I'm riding a motorcycle. So.
Oh, I hope not. Yeah, well, there you go. Bonus fun fact for everybody.
Yeah.
How delightful. Well, thank you so much for rounding out a wonderful conversation with some great fun facts. Thank you so much for the research that you are doing and have done, obviously for quite a long time with this project. Thanks for your time and being on the show.
Thank you, Abby, for inviting me. I mean, it's a really nice opportunity for us to kind of showcase this kind of research that I think has some quirks that maybe some of your listeners wouldn't always be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Student Spotlight, where we highlight the work of graduate and undergraduate society student members. Today, we'll be talking to Go Along. Welcome to the show. Can you start us off by introducing yourself and where you're studying?
Hello, my name is Guolong Liang, a second-year master's student in the Department of Horticulture at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I also finished my bachelor's degree here at UW-Madison as well. I would like to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of Ho-Chunk Nation.
Great, and what are you currently researching?
I am finishing up with my master's degree here at UW-Madison. And in my master's degree, I studied the nitrogen and irrigation management of dark-eyed kidney beans in upper Midwest of the United States, especially in central Wisconsin. Through this research, we hope to gain more insights towards dark-eyed kidney beans management and provide recommendation for related stakeholders within the region.
Wonderful. And if you could have your dream research project, what would that look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And as I advance in my learning in agriculture, I realized that in order to avoid and break divisions in the current food system, we need transdisciplinary collaborative projects. And what I mean by that is people from academia, industry, and organizations to solve a systemic problem together. Growing up with experiences of living in rural China, I hold poverty alleviation nearest to my heart. With experience in agricultural research, I would love to evaluate small-scale farmers' livelihood and their current agricultural production systems from both an agronomist point of view, but also with a sociology's perspective. I would like to conduct a research back home in China and bring more awareness towards the region and also the people who live on the land.
Awesome. If you'd like to get in touch with Go Along about his work, we'll have his contact information in our show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show today, and best wishes on your future studies and career. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you for listening to Field Lab Earth. More information can be found in the description below. Thank you.